All right, let's dive headfirst into one of those movies that, when it dropped, sparked a massive debate between martial arts film enthusiasts and anyone who grew up in the 80s with a soft spot for nostalgia. I'm talking about The Karate Kid from 2010, the one that had people side-eyeing the screen the moment it was announced, because messing with a classic like the 1984 original is basically like tweaking Grandma's secret recipe. Everybody's got an opinion, and nobody wants you changing the ingredients. But here's the thing. This version, far from being some cheap knockoff, ended up carving out its own identity, bringing a different flavor to the table and winning over millions of viewers worldwide. So get comfortable, because we're going to break this movie down from every possible angle. The story it tells, the technical details, the performances, the script choices, and everything that makes it special, or depending on who you ask, a little rough around the edges. The core premise of this film is something pretty much anyone can relate to on a deeply personal level. That gut-wrenching feeling of being the new kid in a place where you don't speak the language, you don't get the customs, and on top of all that, you've got bullies who seem like they were put on this earth specifically to make your life miserable. The story introduces us to Dre Parker, a 12-year-old kid from Detroit, Michigan, who gets uprooted and moved to Beijing, China, with his mom because she landed a job over there. Think about that for a second. You're 12, you just left behind every friend you've ever had, your whole neighborhood, everything familiar, and suddenly you're in a country where you can't even ask for a glass of water without getting a confused look. That alone is tough enough for any kid, but things get way more complicated when Dre, who's a likable kid with good intentions, notices a girl named Mei Ying at the park. And that's when life taps him on the shoulder and goes, "Hold on, things are about to get interesting," because Cheng, the neighborhood tough guy who trains kung fu, doesn't appreciate some American kid getting anywhere near Mei Ying. What follows is one beating after another, relentless harassment that turns Dre's daily existence into a nightmare. But here's where the story gets good, because right in the middle of all that desperation, Dre stumbles into an unlikely ally, Mr. Han, the maintenance guy in his apartment building. And this Mr. Han, who at first glance seems like just a quiet dude minding his own business, turns out to be a kung fu master, carrying a past loaded with pain and secrets. The bond between these two characters is the absolute heart and soul of the movie, and it's what lifts the whole thing from being just a kid learns to fight and gets back at the bully tale into something way deeper and more emotional. Because it's not just about learning kicks and punches. It's about learning discipline, respect, and above all, it's about healing emotional wounds that both of them have been carrying around. Now, let's talk about the main characters, because they're the ones breathing life into this entire story. Dre Parker is our lead, played by Jaden Smith, Will Smith's son, who was 11 during filming. Dre has everything you need to connect with him as a viewer. He's funny, he's brave even when he's terrified, he's got attitude, and most importantly, he's got that never-quit spirit that the whole story hinges on. He's far from a perfect hero. He's a kid who cries when he gets hit, who's afraid to go to school, who sometimes acts out toward his mom, and who makes the kind of mistakes any kid his age would make. And that's exactly what makes him so human and so easy to root for. Then there's Mr. Han, played by Jackie Chan in what a lot of people consider one of the finest performances of his entire career. And I'm not exaggerating even a little. Jackie Chan is known worldwide for his action comedies, for those jaw-dropping fight scenes where he turns everything within reach into a weapon. Chairs, ladders, you name it. But in this film, Chan reveals a completely different side, the dramatic actor. Mr. Han is a man shattered on the inside, weighed down by a personal tragedy that's absolutely devastating. And Chan portrays that pain with such authenticity and raw emotion that you completely forget you're watching the same guy who used to do slapstick action flicks in Hong Kong. His performance has layers. It has nuance. It has stretches of silence that speak louder than any monologue. And it has that perfect blend of tough exterior and inner tenderness that defines the character. Sherry Parker, Dre's mother, is played by Taraji P. Henson, a hugely talented actress who'd already proven herself in films like The Curious Case of Benjamin Button. Sherry is a single mom doing everything in her power to give her son a good life. And the move to China is part of that effort. She's strong, loving, and has a sense of humor that gives the movie some welcome moments of lightness. Her dynamic with Dre feels very real. They argue, they love each other fiercely. She scolds him, but always has his back. And there's one scene in particular where she sees Dre's bruises and her heart just shatters. And so does ours. Mei Ying, played by Wenwen Han, is the girl Dre falls for and who unwittingly sets the whole conflict with Chung into motion. Mei Ying is a gifted young violinist living under pressure from her parents, especially her father, who wants her to focus entirely on music and absolutely does not approve of her friendship with Dre. She represents that first innocent crush of adolescence, that pure feeling that makes you want to be a better version of yourself. And her relationship with Dre is sweet without being saccharine, tender without being cheesy. And then there's Cheng, the primary antagonist among the kids, played by Zhenwei Wang. Cheng isn't just some one-note bully who exists only to be the bad guy. Well, for most of the story, he does act like a ruthless tormentor, making Dre's life a living hell. But there are glimpses of humanity in him, especially toward the end, suggesting that a lot of his aggression comes from the toxic influence of his kung fu instructor, Master Li. And speaking of Master Li, played by Rongguang Yu, now he's the real villain here. He runs the Fighting Dragons Kung Fu Academy where Chung trains, and his philosophy boils down to no mercy, no weakness, destroy your opponent without compassion. He's the anti-Mr. Han in every conceivable way, and his corrosive influence over his young students is one of the most compelling themes the movie explores. But let's get back to the story and how it unfolds, because there are plenty of details worth digging into. When Dre first arrives in Beijing, the film does a terrific job of showing us Chinese culture through the eyes of an American kid. Everything is new, everything is different, and the camera captures that cocktail of wonder and disorientation that Dre is feeling. Streets packed with people, unfamiliar sounds, food he doesn't recognize, a language he can't make heads or tails of. It all creates an atmosphere of alienation that makes you empathize with the protagonist from the jump. And there's a really smart detail in the script. Despite feeling lost, Dre also shows genuine curiosity. He's not a kid who just hates everything new. There are moments where he stands there mesmerized watching people practice Tai Chi in the park, or where he's clearly in awe of the architecture, and that tells you a lot about who he is. He's a kid who's open to the world. It's just that circumstances are making things incredibly hard. The first encounter between Dre and Mei Ying at the park is a beautifully constructed scene. Dre's goofing around with a tennis ball, trying to show off the way kids do when they want to impress someone, and Mei Ying smiles. And in that instant, you can see Dre's whole face light up. It's one of those universal moments we've all lived. Someone smiles at you, and suddenly the world feels like a better place. But of course, Chung is right there watching, and his reaction is immediate and violent. The first fight between Dre and Chung is brutal by PG-rated standards, and it needs to be, because we have to feel the genuine threat that Chung represents. This isn't some sitcom bully who shoves you and steals your lunch money. This is a kid who actually knows how to fight and has zero hesitation about using those skills to hurt someone weaker. The beatings keep coming, and they keep escalating. There's one particularly rough sequence where Chung and his crew chase Dre down and corner him, and it's shot in a way that makes you feel the claustrophobia and the terror Dre is experiencing. There's no heroic music, no last-second rescue. Just a scared kid taking hits he can't return. The film tackles the subject of bullying here in an honest, unvarnished way. It doesn't trivialize what Dre is going through, doesn't present it as something you easily get over. Instead, it shows the real fallout, the constant fear, the humiliation, wanting to hide from the world, dreading school. For any kid or teenager who's been through something similar, those scenes hit incredibly hard. The scene that changes everything, the turning point of the entire movie, happens when Dre tries to get back at Chung by dumping a bucket of dirty water on him from the top of a wall as the bullies walk underneath. The plan works for about 2 seconds, but Chung isn't stupid and chases Dre down. And when he catches up with his crew in tow, the beating they're about to deliver promises to be the worst one yet. But then Mr. Han steps in, this guy who up until now has just been a quiet presence in Dre's life. The neighbor who fixes things and doesn't say much. And what Mr. Han does in that scene is absolutely brilliant, both from an action standpoint and a character standpoint. He doesn't beat the kids up. He doesn't demolish them the way he easily could. Instead, he uses his kung fu to make the kids hit each other, neutralizing them without causing real harm, turning their own aggression into their defeat. It's a perfect demonstration of the philosophy Han is about to teach Dre. Kung fu isn't about violence. It's about control, defense, using your opponent's force against them. After that rescue, the relationship between Dre and Mr. Han starts to take shape. And this is where the film truly takes off. Mr. Han takes Dre to Master Lee's academy to talk to him and ask that his students leave the kid alone. But Master Lee, arrogant and dismissive, mocks Han and challenges him. And that's when Han proposes a deal. If Dre competes in the open kung fu tournament, Cheng and the others will leave him alone until then. Master Lee agrees, fully confident his students will destroy Dre in the tournament, and just like that, the framework is set. Dre has to train kung fu with Mr. Han to prepare for the tournament, where he'll face Chung and the other academy students. And here comes one of the most famous and most debated elements of the entire film, the training. In the 1984 original, Mr. Miyagi taught Daniel to wax on and wax off, and those repetitive motions turned out to be disguised defense techniques. In this version, Mr. Han tells Dre to put his jacket on, take it off, hang it up, pick it up off the ground, put it back on, take it off, hang it up, drop it, pick it up, over and over and over again. Jacket on, jacket off, hang up, pick up, put on, take off. Dre, understandably, thinks Mr. Han has lost his mind or is messing with him. How on earth is he going to learn kung fu by putting on and taking off a jacket? His frustration builds and builds until he finally snaps and yells at Mr. Han that this is a waste of time. And then comes one of the most satisfying moments in the whole movie. Mr. Han asks Dre to repeat the jacket movements while throwing strikes at him, and Dre, without even realizing it, blocks every single one perfectly. The putting on and taking off moves were defensive techniques all along. The look on Dre's face when it clicks is priceless, and it's a moment that works equally well for the character and the audience, because both experience that revelation at the exact same time. From there, the training ramps up and branches out. Mr. Han takes Dre to the Great Wall of China, to ancient temples, to misty mountains, and each setting becomes an opportunity to teach him something new. There's a gorgeous scene at a temple where a woman practices kung fu while controlling a hypnotized cobra's movements, and Dre watches in fascination as the snake follows her hand. Mr. Han explains that kung fu is everywhere, in every movement, every gesture, that it's not just something you do in a gym, but a way of life, a way of engaging with the world around you. And that cobra scene is particularly important because the technique Dre picks up by observing it, that ability to mesmerize an opponent with fluid, deceptive movements, is exactly what he'll use at the movie's climax. There's another training scene that deserves a special shout-out, and that's the reflection on the water sequence. Mr. Han takes Dre to a mountain lake and teaches him to focus, to find inner peace, to control his emotions. He tells him that kung fu isn't about being aggressive. It's about being calm. It's not about attacking. It's about understanding. And these quiet, reflective moments are what give the film its philosophical depth, what elevate it above being simply a martial arts movie for kids. There's a genuine respect for Chinese culture and for the philosophy behind kung fu that comes through in every one of these scenes, and that's something the movie does really well. But the training isn't just physical and technical, it's also emotional. And this is where the relationship between Dre and Mr. Han reaches its most moving point. There's a scene that is probably the most powerful in the entire film, and it's when Dre discovers Mr. Han's secret. It turns out that Han had a wife and a son who died in a car accident, and Han himself was behind the wheel when it happened. Ever since, every year, on the anniversary of their death, Han destroys the car he was building with his son, smashes it to pieces, and then rebuilds it only to destroy it again the following year. It's a cycle of pain, guilt, and self-punishment that Han has been repeating for years, and when Dre stumbles upon it, the scene is gut-wrenching. Jackie Chan is absolutely incredible in that moment. The tears, the barely contained rage, the shame of being caught at his most vulnerable, it's first-rate acting, and anyone who says Jackie Chan can't act should watch this scene and eat their words. What makes the scene truly beautiful is that it's not just about Han's anguish. It's also about Dre's capacity for compassion and maturity beyond his years. Dre doesn't run away, doesn't freak out, doesn't judge. He stays with Han, comforts him as best he can, and in that moment, the dynamic between them transforms from teacher and student to something far deeper, almost father and son. Because, remember, Dre grew up without a father, and Han lost his child. So each one is filling a void in the other's life. It's mirror storytelling, where the two characters reflect and complement each other, and it's handled with a delicacy and sensitivity you simply don't expect from a movie that's ostensibly about a kid learning to throw kicks. Now let's talk a bit about the relationship between Dre and Mei Ying, because it's another aspect the film handles really well. It's a first crush, with all the awkwardness, excitement, and innocence that comes with it. Dre has no idea how to approach her. He messes up. He says dumb things. But his genuine interest and persistence eventually win her over. There's a lovely scene where he takes her to a shadow puppet show, and they're both completely captivated. And another one where she tries to teach him violin, and he's absolutely terrible at it, but gives it his all. And her laughter watching him struggle is one of those things that just warms your heart. But the relationship has a significant hurdle. Mei Ying's father, who doesn't approve of his daughter hanging around with an American boy. And here the film touches, subtly but effectively, on cultural clash and prejudice. Mei Ying's father isn't a villain. He's a dad who wants the best for his daughter according to his own cultural framework. And his disapproval of Dre doesn't come from a place of malice, but from a different set of values about what's appropriate. The resolution of this conflict, when Dre earns the father's respect through his performance at the tournament, is satisfying without being simplistic, and sends a positive message about how respect is earned through actions, not words. Speaking of tournament prep, there's a really clever aspect of the script in how it weaves Dre's training together with scenes that develop other threads of the story. It's not just train, train, train tournament. In between you get comedy, like Dre trying to eat with chopsticks and ending up with food everywhere, or attempting to speak Mandarin and saying something completely wrong. You get tension, like Chung threatening him at school, or Master Li showing up to one of Han's training sessions and glaring with contempt. And you get moments of pure visual beauty. The trip to the Great Wall, the sunset in the mountains, that take full advantage of the Chinese locations and turn the movie into a kind of cinematic love letter to the country. Something I think is spot on about the script, and not enough people mention, is how it handles the evolution of Dre's confidence. Early in the training, Dre is skeptical and frustrated. Then, when he discovers the jacket moves are defense techniques, he starts to believe. As the training progresses, he starts feeling strong and capable. But that confidence isn't a straight line. There are moments of doubt, setbacks, scenes where Dre questions whether he can really do this, whether he can face kids who've been training for years when he's only had a few months. And that non-linear progression is way more realistic and way more interesting than a simple zero-to-hero arc with no bumps along the way. Let's talk about the elephant in the room, the thing a lot of fans of the original criticized before they'd even watched a single frame. This movie is called The Karate Kid, but the martial art featured isn't karate. It's kung fu, and they're absolutely right. Karate is Japanese. Kung fu is Chinese. The movie's set in China. The characters practice kung fu. The tournament is kung fu. So why call it The Karate Kid? The answer is pure business. The name was already an established brand with global recognition, and changing it would have meant losing that marketing edge. In fact, in some regions, the film was released as The Kung Fu Kid, which is way more accurate. But at the end of the day, this is a detail that, while technically incorrect, doesn't affect the quality of the story being told one bit. It's like complaining that a pizzeria is called Crazy Pasta, but serves fantastic pizza. The name might be misleading, but what matters is what's inside, and what's inside this movie is pretty solid. Another common criticism the film caught was the nepotism angle. The fact that Jaden Smith got the part because his father, Will Smith, was one of the producers through his company Overbrook Entertainment alongside his wife, Jada Pinkett Smith. And look, I'm not going to pretend that didn't play a role in the casting, because it obviously did. Will Smith wanted to give his son a platform to showcase his talent, and he used his position and resources to make it happen. But with that said, and being completely honest, Jaden Smith does a solid job in this movie. It's not the most polished performance in the world. He's not the most technically refined child actor out there, but he's got charisma, he's got screen presence, and in the big emotional scenes, he delivers. The moment where he cries out of sheer frustration because he can't take the bullying anymore feels genuine. The scene where he confronts Mr. Han about the jacket has real fire to it, and his physical work in the fight scenes is seriously impressive for a kid his age. So yeah, he probably wouldn't have landed the role without his father's pull, but once he's got it, he does enough to earn it. Now, let's move to the tournament, the movie's third act, where everything that's been built over the first 2 hours comes to a head. The tournament is a visual spectacle, packed with hundreds of competitors from different academies, fantastic fight choreography, and an escalating tension that works beautifully. The script is smart enough not to make all of Dre's fights easy. The early ones they're there to show his progress and give the audience some feel-good wins. But as he advances through the rounds, the opponents get tougher, and Dre has to dig deeper and deeper. The tournament structure follows a classic but effective pattern. Each fight represents a different challenge and a lesson Dre absorbed during training. In the opening rounds, we see him rely on the basic techniques Mr. Han drilled into him with the jacket, those defensive moves that became second nature. The initial opponents are competent but not exceptional, and Dre beats them with a mix of technique and guts that draws cheers from the crowd inside the movie and from the audience in the theater. These are victories that make you feel good, that make you think, this kid's got a shot. And they set the stage for what's coming. But then the tougher opponents show up, Master Lee's Academy students, and the whole dynamic shifts. These guys aren't there to compete. They're there to destroy. Master Lee has drilled a no mercy, no compassion mentality into them, and you see it in how they fight. Aggressive, ruthless, with zero qualms about inflicting real damage. And there's a moment here that's especially jarring and serves as a crucial turning point in the tournament. One of Master Lee's students, acting on his instructor's orders, deliberately injures Dre's leg with an illegal strike. It's the kind of moment that yanks you out of your seat, because you can clearly see it was intentional. Master Lee signaled for it, and the goal was to force Dre out of the tournament through sheer brutality. And this is where the movie does something really interesting from a narrative standpoint, because Dre's injury isn't just a physical obstacle. It's an emotional one, too. With his leg messed up, everybody's telling him to quit, that it's not worth the risk, that he's already proven himself. His mom is worried sick, the crowd is shaken, and Dre himself is in serious pain. But Mr. Han, using a healing technique rooted in his kung fu knowledge, manages to temporarily ease Dre's pain enough for him to continue. And that technique, which some have criticized as too convenient or too magical, is actually grounded in traditional Chinese medicine, in acupressure and pressure point manipulation. Is it a bit of a cinematic stretch? Sure. But it works within the film's world and within the tradition of martial arts cinema, where this kind of master healer ability is an accepted and expected narrative device. The final fight between Dre and Cheng is the movie's crowning moment, and it's crafted with a skill that deserves real recognition. It's not simply a fight where the good guy beats the bad guy and everyone claps. It's a fight that distills the entire emotional journey of both characters, puts everything Dre has learned to the ultimate test, and delivers an outcome that feels satisfying precisely because it's not what you get from a lazy paint-by-numbers movie. Dre enters the fight on a bum leg, clearly at a disadvantage, and Chung is formidable, technically sharp, aggressive, and fueled by his master's expectations. The opening exchanges go clearly in Chung's favor, and there are stretches where it looks like Dre simply can't hang, where the pain in his leg overwhelms him and he's on the verge of going down. The crowd holds its breath. Mr. Han watches from the edge of the mat with a blend of worry and quiet confidence, and Dre's mom can barely watch. And then Dre remembers the cobra scene at the temple, that image of the woman guiding the snake's movements with her hand, and he decides to use that technique. He rises on his good leg, settles into a modified crane stance, and begins weaving his hands hypnotically in front of Cheng, exactly the way the woman did with the cobra. Cheng, thrown off by these unconventional movements, launches an attack, and Dre dodges and connects with a flawless spinning kick that wins the match. The stadium erupts, the music soars, and in that moment, all the frustration, all the pain, all the fear Dre has carried through the entire movie transforms into pure euphoria. It's one of those cinematic moments that gives you chills, not because it's a surprise, but because it's been legitimately earned through 2 hours of character development and narrative building. But what makes this ending truly special isn't Dre's victory itself. It's what happens afterward. Cheng, who's just been beaten, stands up, and instead of reacting with anger or bitterness, he walks toward Dre holding the trophy and hands it over with genuine respect. "You deserve this," he says, and bows. And in that moment, Chung stops being the antagonist and becomes a fully realized human being, a kid who's learned something valuable from his defeat. That respect is earned through honor, not violence. And Master Li, watching the scene with visible disgust, finds himself completely alone, abandoned by his own students who finally see the poison in his teaching. It's a finale that speaks to redemption, respect, and the idea that even your fiercest rival can come to recognize your worth if you prove you deserve that recognition. Now, let's shift gears and talk about the people behind the camera, because a movie's quality doesn't rest on the actors alone. It depends on an entire team of professionals working in concert to make something that clicks. The director of The Karate Kid 2010 is Harald Zwart, a Norwegian filmmaker who, let's be real, isn't exactly a name you'd find on lists of great cinema auteurs. Before this, Zwart had directed things like Agent Cody Banks and The Pink Panther 2, films that, shall we say, aren't exactly gunning for Academy Awards. But you have to give Zwart credit. With The Karate Kid, he delivered what is probably his best work. It's not a movie with a distinctive auteurist vision or some groundbreaking visual style, but it's well directed. The scenes flow naturally. The pacing is right most of the time. The fight sequences are nicely choreographed and clearly shot, and the emotional scenes get the space and weight they need. Zwart doesn't try to reinvent the wheel, and that's fine. This story doesn't need a director who wants to show off how clever he is. It needs one who can tell the story effectively, and Zwart gets the job done. The screenplay was written by Christopher Murphy, and it's his only major film credit, which is pretty curious for someone who wrote a movie that grossed over $350 million worldwide. The script takes the basic structure of Robert Mark Kamen's original and transplants it into a new cultural context, keeping the essential ingredients: bullied kid, reluctant mentor, unconventional training, tournament, but adding new layers and changing enough details to make the story feel fresh. Some argue the script follows the original structure too closely, and that's a fair point. If you've seen the 1984 film, you know exactly what's going to happen at every point in this version. But it's also worth noting that the script introduces new elements that enrich the story. Mr. Han's tragedy is more fleshed out and emotionally resonant than Mr. Miyagi's. The Chinese cultural setting adds a dimension that didn't exist in the original, and the mother-son dynamic is more developed. The film was produced by Will Smith and Jada Pinkett Smith through Overbrook Entertainment, along with Jerry Weintraub, who produced the original Karate Kid films in the 80s, and James Lasseter. Weintraub's involvement is significant because it gives the movie a direct link to the original franchise and a legitimacy it might not have had otherwise. Weintraub understood the essence of what made the original story work and made sure that essence stayed intact in the new version, even if the packaging was completely different. And the Smiths' involvement, beyond the obvious interest in launching their son's career, brought financial muscle and star power that made it possible for the film to have the budget and distribution needed to become a global hit. The movie cost roughly $40 million. Not a massive budget by Hollywood standards, but enough to shoot on real locations in China, bring in Jackie Chan, and put together a final product with high production values. The backstory of how the movie came together is pretty interesting in its own right. The idea sparked when Will Smith noticed that his son Jaden, who had a natural aptitude for sports and martial arts, could anchor a modernized take on the 80s classic. Smith reached out to Weintraub, who was initially reluctant about doing a remake, but eventually came around when he saw the Smiths' passion and commitment to the project. The decision to set the movie in China rather than the U.S. was a bold, creative call that gave the film its own identity and differentiated it enough from the original to avoid feeling like a simple retread. It was also a smart business move, since the Chinese market was becoming increasingly important for Hollywood, and having an international star like Jackie Chan in a lead role would attract audiences on both sides of the globe. Regarding Jackie Chan, his involvement was absolutely crucial to the project's success. and not just because of his fame. Chan brought a cultural and martial arts authenticity that would have been impossible to replicate with anyone else. He personally oversaw much of the fight choreography, made sure the kung fu techniques depicted were accurate and respectful of tradition, and contributed ideas for his character's development. In interviews, Chan has said he initially had reservations about taking the role because he didn't want to be unfavorably compared to Pat Morita, whose portrayal of Mr. Miyagi is iconic. But when he read the script and saw that Mr. Han was a sufficiently different character to stand on his own, he signed on. And that turned out to be the right call, because his performance is one of the movie's strongest pillars. The rest of the cast deserves recognition too. Taraji Henson as Sherry Parker brings warmth and genuineness to a role that anchors the film in reality. Her scenes with Jaden Smith have a mother-son energy that feels authentic, probably because Henson is the kind of actress who can build chemistry with anyone she's working with. Wenwen Han as Mei Ying is charming and talented, and her violin playing in the film is the real deal. Han is actually a violinist in real life. Zhenwei Wang as Cheng is impressive in his fight scenes, displaying a command of wushu that's remarkable for such a young performer, and he manages to inject enough humanity into the character to make his redemption at the end feel believable. And Rongguang Yu as Master Li, though he gets less screen time than the leads, leaves a lasting impression as the story's villain, radiating coldness and contempt in every frame he occupies. The chemistry between the principal actors is something worth pausing on, because it's one of the most critical factors in making a movie like this work. The teacher-student bond between Jackie Chan and Jaden Smith is convincing and emotionally resonant, and a lot of that comes down to Chan's generosity as a performer. In their scenes together, Chan lets Smith shine when it's the kid's moment, but he also knows when to take the reins and push the emotional stakes to another level. There's no competition between them. There's collaboration, and you can feel it on screen. Han's confession scene about his family is a perfect example. Chan carries the emotional weight, but Smith reacts in a way that complements and amplifies the emotion, and the result is a scene that plays like a duet, not a solo. The chemistry between Jaden Smith and Wenwen Han as the young couple works too, though it's naturally more restrained given the nature of the relationship they're portraying. They're kids, so their romance is innocent and shy, and both Smith and Han capture that adorable awkwardness of a first crush in a way that feels authentic. No passionate kisses, no dramatic declarations, just glances, smiles, and those uncomfortable silences where both of them want to say something but can't figure out how. It's refreshing to see a romantic subplot in a movie that doesn't feel forced or premature, and that's thanks to both the script and the natural ease with which the young actors play it. Let's shift now to the more technical side of things, because there's a lot to say about how this movie is put together visually. The cinematographer is Roger Pratt, a British veteran known for his work on films like Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, Chocolate, and Troy. Pratt brings an eye for composition and lighting to The Karate Kid that gives it a visual quality above what you typically expect from this kind of production. The outdoor scenes shot in China are flat-out stunning. The Great Wall, the Wudang Mountains, Beijing's hutongs, the ancient temples. Everything is captured with a beauty that takes full advantage of the spectacular locations. Pratt knows when to pull back to wide shots to showcase the grandeur of the landscape and when to push in close on the characters' faces to catch the intimate emotion, and that back and forth between the epic and the personal is one of the film's key visual strengths. The use of lighting deserves a mention, too. The outdoor training scenes are bathed in an almost golden natural light, especially the ones that take place around sunset, and that creates an atmosphere of warmth and transcendence that reinforces the near-spiritual quality of Dre's training. In contrast, the scenes at Master Lee's academy are lit in a harsher, cooler way. Sharp shadows, desaturated colors, creating an oppressive atmosphere that mirrors the violent, merciless philosophy taught there. It's a smart use of lighting as a narrative tool, where light and color communicate the emotional environment of each scene without anyone needing to say a word. The nighttime scenes have their own visual character as well. The first time we see Dre in his apartment at night, feeling alone and missing home, the lighting is dim and bluish, creating a sense of melancholy that matches the character's emotional state. And the nighttime scene where Dre discovers Mr. Hans smashing the car has an almost expressionistic quality. Dramatic shadows, a limited color palette that underscores the emotional intensity. These are details you might not consciously register while watching, but they shape your emotional experience on a subliminal level, and that's exactly what a great cinematographer does. The production design, handled by Francois Audouy, also makes a significant contribution to the visual experience. Interior spaces are designed to reflect the personalities and emotional states of the characters. Dre and his mom's apartment is modern but impersonal, reflecting that they're in a place that doesn't feel like theirs. Mr. Han's workshop is full of objects with history, each one telling a piece of his story. And Master Lee's academy is sparse and militaristic, mirroring his philosophy of discipline without compassion. These design choices might seem secondary, but they're fundamental to building the movie's world and pulling the viewer into the story. The film's score, composed by James Horner, is another technical element that merits praise. Horner, one of the most talented and prolific film composers in Hollywood history before his tragic death in 2015, crafted a score that blends Western orchestral elements with traditional Chinese instruments and melodies, creating a sound that's simultaneously familiar and exotic, accessible and culturally specific. The music accompanies the movie's shifting tones perfectly. It's vibrant and energetic during fight scenes, delicate and tender during intimate moments, and epic and transcendent at points of peak emotional significance. The piece that plays during the mountain training sequences, Chinese flutes layered over orchestral strings, is particularly beautiful and perfectly captures that sense of discovery and growth. Beyond Horner's original score, the film features songs from contemporary artists that give the soundtrack a modern feel. Never Say Never by Justin Bieber, featuring Jaden Smith, is probably the most well-known track from the soundtrack. And whatever you might think of Justin Bieber, the song works perfectly as the movie's inspirational anthem and was a massive hit that significantly boosted the film's promotion. There are also tracks from Chinese artists that add cultural authenticity, creating an eclectic soundtrack that mirrors the multicultural nature of the film itself. The runtime is worth bringing up because at 140 minutes, 2 hours and 20 minutes, it's noticeably longer than the original, which clocked in at 126. And some critics pointed out that those extra minutes show that the movie has stretches where the pacing dips and it feels unnecessarily drawn out. And they've got a point. There are training sequences that could have been tighter, and the middle section between the start of training and the tournament has moments that feel a bit repetitive. But it's also true that those extra moments let the relationship between Dre and Han develop more organically, and they give the cultural exploration scenes room to breathe. It's a trade-off. The movie could be leaner, but it would sacrifice some of its emotional richness in the process. Let's talk reception now, both from audiences and critics, because the numbers paint a pretty clear picture. The Karate Kid 2010 was a massive commercial success. On a $40 million production budget, it pulled in over $359 million worldwide, $176 million domestic, and $182 million international. Those figures made it one of the most profitable releases of 2010 and proved that the Karate Kid brand still had enormous pulling power 3 decades after the original. Its performance in China was especially notable, over $40 million, making it one of the most successful Hollywood films in that market at the time. It opened on a summer weekend and went head-to-head with The A-Team, comfortably outpacing it at the box office, which was a clear signal that audiences chose the emotional story of a young martial artist. Well, kung fu practitioner, but you know what I mean, over the mindless action of a Soldiers of Fortune reboot. Critical reception was mostly positive, though not unanimous. On Rotten Tomatoes, the film holds a 66% approval rating from critics and a 72% audience score. Decent numbers, if not spectacular. Critics who praised it highlighted Jackie Chan's performance as the film's high point, the visual quality of the production, and the emotional effectiveness of the mentor-student dynamic. Roger Ebert, one of the most respected critics in the history of the medium, gave it 3.5 out of 4 stars and called the movie surprisingly good, noting that Chan delivered the best performance of his English-language career. Other critics, less enthusiastic, pointed out that the film was predictable due to its adherence to the original structure, that Jaden Smith was adequate but not exceptional, and that the runtime was excessive. But beyond the numbers and the professional reviews, the most interesting reaction came from the fan community, because that's where opinions really polarized. Fans of the 1984 original split into 2 clearly defined camps: those who appreciated the new version as a respectful, emotionally effective update of a story they loved, and those who rejected it as an unnecessary remake that could never capture the magic of the original. And both camps make valid points. Supporters note that the film works on its own terms, that it has genuinely powerful emotional moments, that Jackie Chan is incredible, and that the Chinese setting gives it a unique flavor. Detractors argue that the classic should never have been touched, that Jaden Smith doesn't have Ralph Macchio's charisma, that calling it Karate Kid when there's no karate is an insult to everyone's intelligence, and that the result, while competent, lacks the charm and authenticity of the original. My own take, if you're asking, is that both sides have merit, but judging this film exclusively through the lens of the original is unfair. Every movie deserves to be assessed on its own terms, and when you look at The Karate Kid 2010 as its own thing, what you find is an entertaining, well-crafted family film with solid performances, an emotional story, and a positive message. It's not a masterpiece. It won't change your life or revolutionize the industry, but it's exactly what it sets out to be. A movie that makes you feel good, gets you emotionally invested, makes you cheer for the underdog, and sends you off with a smile when the credits roll. And for the countless kids who hadn't seen the original, this was their Karate Kid, their first experience with this story. And for them, this is the definitive version, the one that created memories and inspired them to sign up for martial arts classes. That kind of impact can't be measured in Rotten Tomatoes percentages. Let's break down the specific strengths of the film, because it has several that are worth highlighting in detail. The first and most obvious is Jackie Chan. I've mentioned it multiple times already, but I cannot overstate it. His portrayal of Mr. Han is extraordinary. It's a role that demands an emotional range we don't typically associate with Jackie Chan, and he nails it in every scene. The vulnerability he shows when discussing his family, the patience with which he teaches Dre, the firmness when he stands up to Master Lee, the quiet joy he feels watching Dre improve. Every emotion is authentic and nuanced, and it elevates the entire movie to a level it simply wouldn't reach without him. If the original had the good fortune of Pat Morita, who earned an Oscar nomination for Mr. Miyagi, this version has the good fortune of Jackie Chan, in a role that proves he's so much more than a martial artist and a comedian. He's a genuine actor with depth and sensitivity. The second strength is the Chinese setting, which isn't just a pretty backdrop, it's an integral part of the story. The decision to move the action from California to Beijing was spot on because it gave the movie its own identity and allowed it to explore themes of cultural collision, adaptation, and discovery that the original never touched. The locations are spectacular. The Great Wall, the Wudang Mountains, Beijing's traditional hutongs, the Forbidden City, and they're shot with an eye for beauty that turns the film into a visual love letter to China. But beyond the aesthetics, the movie shows genuine respect for Chinese culture, traditions, and philosophy, and you can see it in the details, in how Kung Fu is presented not just as a fighting style, but as a way of life, in how Chinese family dynamics are depicted with their values of respect and obedience, in how elements of traditional Chinese medicine are woven into the narrative. It's not a perfect or comprehensive portrayal. No 2-hour movie can capture the complexity of a millennial culture, but it's respectful and sincere, and that counts for a lot. The third strength is the emotional story, specifically the bond between Dre and Mr. Han. This relationship is the engine driving the entire film, and it works because both characters need something from the other. Dre needs a mentor, a father figure, someone to teach him not just how to fight, but how to grow as a person. Mr. Han needs a reason to reconnect with life, to break free from his cycle of grief and self-punishment, to feel like he can still do something good for someone. And as they train together, both begin to heal. Dre gains confidence and strength. Han rediscovers joy and purpose. It's a story of mutual healing that goes far beyond martial arts, and it's what gives the movie its emotional weight. The fourth strength, and this one's more technical, is the fight choreography. The action sequences were coordinated by Wu Gang with oversight from Jackie Chan himself, and the results are impressive. The fights are dynamic, clearly shot with longer takes that let you appreciate the movements instead of hiding them behind frantic editing, and they follow a logical progression that mirrors Dre's growth as a fighter. The final bout between Dre and Cheng is especially well choreographed, with fluid movements and a rhythm that sustains tension from start to finish. And what's most impressive is that Jaden Smith did much of the physical work himself, having trained intensively for months before shooting, learning wushu and rehearsing the choreography until he could execute it with real fluidity. That commitment is visible on screen and gives the fight scenes an authenticity that would have been lost with a double or excessive digital effects. Now, let's be fair and talk about the weaknesses, because no honest analysis can skip over them. The first and most glaring is the plot's predictability. If you know the original, you know exactly what's coming at every point. Kid moves to new place, gets bullied, finds a mentor, trains in an unorthodox way, enters a tournament, wins. There are no narrative surprises, no unexpected turns, no subversion of expectations. And even though the execution is good, the absence of surprise takes away some of the story's punch. When you can call every beat 10 minutes in advance, a piece of the magic disappears, no matter how well it's done. It's like watching a game when you already know the final score. You can appreciate the plays, but the tension isn't the same. The second weakness is, paradoxically, something some consider a strength: the runtime. At 140 minutes, the movie is longer than the story it's telling really warrants. There are scenes that go on longer than they need to, training sequences that repeat without adding new information, and subplots that aren't developed enough to justify the screen time they get. The Mei Ying violin recital subplot, for instance, takes up a fair amount of time but doesn't have the emotional depth to land with real impact. And there's a stretch in the second act, between the start of training and the resolution of the Mei Ying family conflict, where the movie loses momentum and feels like it's treading water. A more aggressive editor could have trimmed 15 or 20 minutes without losing anything essential, and the result would have been a tighter, more dynamic film. The third weakness, and this one's more subjective, is Jaden Smith's performance. And look, I'm not saying it's bad. It's serviceable, it has its moments, and for an 11-year-old, it's more than respectable. But there are scenes where the inexperience shows, where dialogue sounds a touch forced, where the emotion doesn't quite land all the way. Compared to Ralph Macchio in the original, who had more acting experience and a natural charisma that filled the screen, Jaden Smith comes up a bit short. And compared to Jackie Chan, who's operating on a completely different level as an actor in this film, the gap becomes more obvious. It's like putting a promising youth academy player next to Messi. The kid might be good, but the difference in caliber is clear. That said, Smith has something a lot of child actors lack, and that's physical presence. He's fantastic in the fight scenes. The kung fu moves are executed with a crispness and energy that's genuinely impressive, and that compensates to some degree for the limitations on the purely dramatic side. The fourth weakness is the villain's treatment. Master Lee is effective as an antagonist because he's repulsive and threatening, but he's underdeveloped as a character. We know nothing about his background. We don't really understand why he embraces such an aggressive philosophy. There's no complexity to him. He's evil because the movie needs someone to be evil, full stop. Compared to John Kreese in the original, who at least had a military backstory that explained his no-mercy mindset, Master Lee is a flat character who works as a plot device but not as a human being. And that's a missed opportunity, because the movie could have been richer if it had explored Lee's motivations and shown that the violence and aggression he teaches have roots in his own personal history. There's a theme I want to dig into now, and it's the cultural differences the film addresses. One of the most interesting and least discussed aspects of the whole thing. This movie isn't just a tale about bullying and martial arts. It's also a story about what it means to be a foreigner, about cultural collision, and about how communication and understanding can bridge the gaps of language and custom. Dre arrives in China without a word of Mandarin and without a clue about local culture, and the film shows both his frustration and his gradual adaptation. The cultural comedy beats are genuine. The scene where Dre and his mom try to communicate with their neighbors using gestures and translation apps, Dre's bewilderment at the food, his reaction to realizing that in China, you haggle prices at the market instead of paying what's on the tag. All those details create an honest, funny picture of the expat experience. But the movie goes beyond comedy and touches on deeper stuff. The relationship between Dre and Mei Ying, for example, is shaped by cultural differences in how personal relationships are understood. For Dre, who comes from an American culture where kids have more freedom to socialize, approaching Mei Ying is the most natural thing in the world. But for Mei Ying's parents, who hold a more traditional view of relationships and are concerned about their daughter's reputation, a friendship with an American boy is inappropriate. The movie doesn't judge either side. It simply presents the tension and lets the viewer process it. And the resolution, when Mei Ying's father accepts Dre after witnessing his honor and courage at the tournament, is satisfying without being naive, sending a message that mutual respect can overcome cultural barriers when you prove who you are through your actions. There's also the theme of upbringing and education, embodied in the contrast between Mr. Han and Master Lee. Both are teachers, both teach Kung Fu, but their philosophies are diametrically opposed. Mr. Han teaches that Kung Fu is about peace, defense, self-mastery. Master Lee teaches that Kung Fu is about domination, attack, annihilation of the opponent. And the film clearly sides with Han's philosophy, showing that Lee's students are aggressive, fearful of their teacher, and emotionally stunted, while Dre, under Han's guidance, blossoms not just as a fighter, but as a human being. It's a statement about education and how the way we teach young people determines the kind of adults they become. And it's an especially timely message in a world where too many coaches, teachers, and parents confuse discipline with authoritarianism and excellence with aggression. Another dimension of the movie worth exploring is its handling of grief and loss, channeled through Mr. Han's story. The revelation that Han lost his wife and son in a car accident he caused is devastating on its own. But what makes it even more powerful is the way Han processes that pain. By destroying and rebuilding the car he was assembling with his son, repeating the cycle over and over, year after year. It's a brilliant metaphor for unprocessed grief, for the inability to let go of the past, for punishing yourself over something you can't change. And when Dre, having witnessed this scene, tells Han that his wife and son wouldn't want him living like that they'd want him to be happy, it's a moment of wisdom coming from a child's mouth that carries the weight of ages. And Han's response, or rather his lack of a verbal one, just that look of a man who knows the kid is right but can't accept it yet, is pure acting. It's Jackie Chan proving he can say more with silence than many actors manage with a whole speech. Han's transformation over the course of the film is gradual and believable. Early on, he's closed off, distant, someone who barely engages with the world beyond fixing things in the building. He agrees to teach Dre more out of obligation than desire, as part of the deal with Master Lee. But as he trains the boy, something shifts inside him. He starts to smile, to crack jokes, to connect emotionally with Dre in a way he hasn't experienced since his son died. And when, at the tournament, he watches Dre fight with honor and courage, the look of pride on his face is the look of a father, not an instructor. The movie never spells it out with clunky dialogue or melodramatic scenes. It simply shows it through gestures, glances, and silences, and trusts that the viewer will understand what's happening. And that is visual and emotional storytelling at its finest. I also want to touch on something that stirs debate among martial arts fans: the believability of Dre's progression as a fighter. Some critics point out that it's unrealistic for a kid with a few months of training to compete against and defeat opponents who've been practicing kung fu for years. And from a strictly realistic standpoint, they're dead right. In the real world, a few months of training, no matter how intense, can't make up for years of practice. But we're in movie territory here, specifically martial arts movie territory, where the golden rule has always been that the quality of training and the strength of spirit can overcome the quantity of experience. It's the same logic behind Rocky, where an unknown boxer goes the distance with the world champion, or Star Wars, where a farm boy with no training blows up a space station. It's a narrative convention we accept because it allows us to believe in the possibility of overcoming the odds, and rejecting it in this movie while accepting it elsewhere would be inconsistent. That said, the film does make an effort to ground Dre's progress in something credible. The training Mr. Han puts him through isn't conventional, but it's intensive and constant. Dre trains every day, for hours, and the repetitive jacket movements build the muscle memory and physical foundation essential to Kung Fu. On top of that, Mr. Han teaches Dre not just moves, but strategy, how to read an opponent, how to anticipate attacks, how to redirect the other person's force. And at the tournament, Dre doesn't win by being stronger or more technically proficient. He wins by being smarter, more adaptable, and ultimately more determined. His victory over Cheng in the final isn't a display of martial superiority. It's a display of ingenuity and heart. He uses an unconventional technique that catches Cheng off guard and capitalizes on that moment of confusion to land the decisive blow. It's not the cleanest win in the world, but it's plausible within the film's context, and that's all it needs to be. There's an aspect of the production I find fascinating, and that doesn't get discussed nearly enough: the movie's cultural impact on how Western audiences relate to Chinese culture. In 2010, when the film came out, the cultural relationship between the West and China was at an interesting inflection point. China's economy was booming, Chinese pop culture was starting to make inroads in Western markets, but there was still a significant level of ignorance and stereotyping among general audiences. The Karate Kid 2010 served, for many Western viewers, especially younger ones, as a window into China, its landscapes, its culture, its philosophy, its people. And while obviously a Hollywood movie can't and doesn't pretend to be an anthropological documentary, it did have the effect of humanizing and normalizing Chinese culture for an audience that might have known it only through stereotypes or news headlines. Dre learns to love China, learns to respect its traditions, and the audience goes on that journey with him. It's cinematic soft power in its most effective form. And speaking of impact, the film had a tangible effect on the popularity of martial arts among young people. After its release, kung fu schools and martial arts academies in general reported significant jumps in youth enrollment, particularly in the U.S. and Europe. It's the same phenomenon that happened with the 1984 original, which triggered a karate boom, and that happens whenever a popular film or show presents martial arts in an inspiring light. People, especially kids, want to replicate what they see on screen. And in this case, the movie's message that martial arts aren't just about fighting, but about discipline, respect, and personal growth is a message worth spreading. So, if the film got more kids to sign up for kung fu classes and learn those values, that's an unambiguously good thing. Let's talk a bit about the tournament music, because it's a huge contributor to the climactic experience. When Dre steps into the arena for the first time and takes in the scale of the event, thousands of spectators, dozens of competitors, giant banners, Horner's score gradually builds in intensity, creating a sense of awe and nervous energy that the viewer shares with the character. It's music that puts you in Dre's shoes, makes you feel those butterflies, that mix of excitement and dread that comes before any big competition. And during the fights, Horner alternates between percussive tension and dramatic silence, creating a musical rhythm that perfectly complements the visual rhythm of the choreography. The piece that plays during the final fight, those ascending strings that keep building and building right up to the decisive strike, is one of those moments where music and image fuse so perfectly you can't separate one from the other. I want to take a moment to highlight something I think is underrated about this movie: the comedy. The Karate Kid 2010 is essentially a drama with action elements, but it has a sense of humor that works really well and delivers the moments of lightness needed to balance out the emotional intensity. A lot of the humor comes from Dre, who's a kid with a big personality and a sharp tongue that constantly gets him into trouble. His sarcastic comments, his over-the-top reactions to Chinese culture, his botched attempts to impress Mei Ying, all of it generates genuine laughs that never feel forced or out of place. There's humor in the Dre-Han dynamic, too, especially in the early stages of training, when Dre can't figure out why he has to put on and take off a jacket 1,000 times, and his frustration comes out as comic protest. And Jackie Chan, who's a master of physical humor, adds his own subtle comedic touches. The way he raises his eyebrows, his facial expressions when Dre says something particularly ridiculous, his gestures of exasperation at the kid's impatience. It all adds up to a comic texture that makes the film more enjoyable. There's one scene in particular that always gets me laughing, and it's when Dre, after weeks of the jacket routine, says something along the lines of, "If you want me to do your laundry, just say so and save me all this suffering." The line is funny on its own, but what makes it especially great is Han's reaction, completely unfazed, as if Dre's frustration were the most predictable thing in the world. He just says, again, with that infuriatingly calm demeanor that defines the character. It's humor that grows organically out of the character dynamic, not humor jammed in from the outside, and that's exactly why it lands. I'd also like to explore the spiritual dimension of the film, because it's something that sets this version apart from the original in a significant way. While the 1984 Karate Kid carried elements of Japanese Budo philosophy, the warrior's path, this version immerses itself in Taoist philosophy and the tradition of Kung Fu as a spiritual journey. Mr. Han teaches Dre that Kung Fu doesn't start or end with the body. It starts in the mind and the spirit. The mountain meditation scenes, the cobra lesson, the concept of chi, or life energy, all of it points to an understanding of Kung Fu that goes far beyond physical technique and presents it as a holistic discipline integrating body, mind, and spirit. And this spiritual layer isn't delivered in a preachy or heavy-handed way. It's woven naturally into the training and the relationship between Dre and Han. The scene in the Wudang Mountains, where Dre and Han visit a monastery and Dre watches the monks practice Kung Fu, is probably the most visually spectacular and spiritually resonant sequence in the entire film. The monks' movements are fluid and graceful, as if they're dancing with the wind, and the camera captures them with reverence, treating them not as a tourist attraction, but as practitioners of an ancient art deserving of deep respect. And when Han tells Dre to just watch, to observe and feel without trying to analyze or imitate, he's teaching a lesson about humility and the importance of being present in the moment. It's a lesson that transcends Kung Fu and applies to life in general. And it's one of those moments where the film rises above its family entertainment category and touches something genuinely profound. Coming back to the narrative structure, I want to flag something I think the script does really cleverly: the way it uses Dre's failures as engines for growth. Every time Dre fails, and he fails multiple times throughout the movie, the failure isn't an end point. It's a launch pad for something new. His failure to defend himself against Chung leads him to find Mr. Han. His failure to understand the jacket training leads to the revelation that the moves are defense techniques. His failure to impress Mei Ying's father pushes him to try harder at the tournament, and his partial failure when he gets injured during the tournament leads him to deploy the Cobra technique, something he never would have attempted if he hadn't been in a desperate situation. Every failure is a seed that blooms into success, and that's a powerful message for the movie's young audience. It's not about never falling down. It's about how you get back up. There's a script detail I find particularly elegant: the symbolic echo between Mr. Han and Dre in relation to their respective fathers. Dre lost his dad. The movie briefly mentions that Dre's father passed away before the events of the story, and Han lost his son. When they find each other, each sees in the other a chance to fill that void. Dre finds in Han the paternal guidance he needs, and Han finds in Dre the opportunity to be the father he can no longer be to his own child. And the film handles this parallel with admirable subtlety. It never spells it out with clunky dialogue or maudlin scenes. It simply shows it through the evolution of their relationship, through gestures and glances, and trusts that the viewer will pick up on the emotional connection without having it explained to them. It's visual and emotional storytelling in its purest form, and it's one of the script's greatest achievements. I also want to address something interesting from a representation standpoint. The fact that this movie's protagonist is a black kid in China. In the context of 2010 Hollywood, having a black lead in a martial arts film that wasn't a comedy or a genre exploitation piece was relatively uncommon. And the film handles Dre's race in a way that's both conscious and natural. It doesn't ignore the fact that Dre is black in a country where the overwhelming majority of people are ethnically Han Chinese, but it doesn't make that the central issue or a narrative problem either. Dre is an outsider in China not because of his race, but because he's American, because he doesn't speak the language, because he doesn't know the customs. His race is one element of his identity, but not the sole defining one. And that's healthy representation, acknowledging difference without reducing the character to it. There's a production aspect I'd like to touch on, the work of the stunt coordinators and the stunt team. Although both Jaden Smith and the young actors playing the Kung Fu students performed much of their own physical work, there were moments that required doubles and specialized coordination. The stunt team was recruited primarily from China, and many of them were professional wushu practitioners with years of experience in national and international competitions. Their work on the film is impeccable. Every strike, every kick, every jump is executed with a precision and fluidity that gives the fight scenes an authenticity you can feel in every frame. And the fact that the movie uses relatively long takes during the fight sequences, rather than the frenetic editing that's become so common in Western action films, allows the viewer to truly appreciate the skill and choreography on display. It's an approach closer to Asian action cinema than to Hollywood's typical style, and it works perfectly. On the choreography front, credit goes to Wu Gang, the film's action coordinator. Wu Gang, who's worked on numerous Chinese martial arts productions, designed the fight choreography with a perfect balance between spectacle and believability. The tournament fights don't look like movie fights. They look like wushu competition bouts, complete with rules, scoring, and protocols that give them structure and realism. Each competitor has a distinct style, which provides visual variety throughout the tournament sequences and keeps them from becoming repetitive. And Dre's fights are choreographed to reflect his evolution as a fighter. The earlier ones are more cautious and defensive, relying on the jacket techniques for blocking and countering, while the later ones are more creative and risky, incorporating Mr. Han's advanced lessons. It's a progression that's not only narratively satisfying, but choreographically brilliant. I want to touch on something relevant in the current landscape, the movie's legacy more than a decade after its release. The Karate Kid, 2010, has had an interesting afterlife beyond its theatrical run. On streaming platforms, it's found new audiences discovering it years later. And on social media, it periodically sparks discussions about whether it's a good movie, whether it surpasses the original, and whether Jaden Smith was the right choice. But perhaps the most interesting part of its legacy is how it shifted perceptions of Jackie Chan as an actor. Before this film, Chan was seen primarily as an action comedy star. After it, a lot of people started recognizing him as a dramatic performer capable of carrying the emotional weight of a story. That opened doors for Chan in more dramatic projects like The Foreigner, 2017, where he plays a grief-shattered father seeking vengeance for his daughter's death. Without The Karate Kid, 2010, those opportunities might not have materialized, or at least not as soon. As for Jaden Smith, his career after the film has been, let's say, uneven. He headlined After Earth, 2013, alongside his father Will Smith, which was a significant critical and commercial failure, and since then he's focused more on music and personal ventures than mainstream filmmaking. He didn't follow the upward trajectory many predicted after The Karate Kid's success, and that's fed the perception that his role was more a product of nepotism than genuine talent. It's an unfair perception. Career success depends on many factors beyond ability. But there's no getting around the fact that The Karate Kid remains by a wide margin the strongest entry in Jaden Smith's filmography. And that says something about both the quality of that particular movie and the professional choices he made afterward. There's been a long-running rumor about a potential sequel, and it's worth a brief mention. Since the original success, a second installment has been discussed multiple times, one that would continue Dre's story in China, possibly pitting him against a new challenge or delving deeper into kung fu culture. Jackie Chan has said in interviews he'd be willing to return as Mr. Han, and the producers have expressed interest. But as of now, no sequel has materialized, and with the passage of time and shifts in Jaden Smith's career, it seems increasingly unlikely. What did happen is that in 2024, a new Karate Kid film was announced that would connect the original franchise with this version, featuring both Ralph Macchio and Jackie Chan, though the project's details have evolved throughout development. It's an intriguing idea that could unite fans of both iterations, but also a risky endeavor that could disappoint one camp, the other, or everyone. Let's talk about something that doesn't get discussed nearly enough in relation to this film: its exploration of honor. Honor is a central concept in many Asian cultures, and the movie integrates it in several ways. For Mr. Han, honor lies in personal integrity, doing the right thing even when no one's watching, using your abilities to protect rather than destroy. For Master Lee, honor is about victory, being the strongest, dominating others. And for Dre, honor is something he discovers over the course of the film. At first, for him it's simply about not getting humiliated, about standing up for himself, about not looking like a coward. But as his training with Han progresses, Dre comes to understand that real honor has nothing to do with winning or losing fights. It's about how you carry yourself, the respect you show others, the dignity with which you face adversity. That evolution in his understanding of honor is one of the character's most important arcs, and it's so seamlessly woven into the narrative that you barely notice it consciously, but you feel it in every scene. The movie also addresses perseverance in a way that's inspiring without being preachy. Dre wants to quit multiple times. He wants to go back to Detroit. He wants to drop the training. He wants to withdraw from the tournament when his leg gets hurt. And every time there's someone, his mom, Mr. Han, Mei Ying, or his own inner drive, who pushes him to keep going. But the film doesn't present perseverance as easy or inherently heroic. It shows that sometimes pushing through hurts, that sometimes you don't want to get up, that sometimes the voice in your head tells you it's not worth it, and it shows that persevering despite all of that, despite the pain, the fear, the doubt, is what defines a person. Not talent, not strength, not luck. The decision to keep going when everything's telling you to stop. I want to spend a moment on how the film represents Beijing because it adds a lot to both the visual and cultural experience. The Beijing we see in The Karate Kid is a city of contrasts. Modern skyscrapers alongside traditional hutongs, shopping malls next to street markets, 21st century technology rubbing shoulders with ancient traditions. The movie captures this duality effectively, presenting a Beijing that's simultaneously old and new, familiar and foreign, beautiful and chaotic. And it does so without falling into gratuitous exoticism or idealization. The city is shown with its flaws and its virtues, its beauty and its roughness. For many Western viewers, this was their first cinematic glimpse of Beijing beyond the Forbidden City and Tiananmen Square, and that gave the film an unintentional but very real educational value. The scenes shot on real locations bring an authenticity that would have been impossible to recreate on a soundstage. When you see Dre running through Hutong alleyways surrounded by neighbors going about their daily lives, or when you see Mr. Han walking through a market bursting with sounds and smells that practically reach through the screen, you feel like you're there, experiencing it alongside the characters. That's something no amount of CGI can replace. Reality has a texture, an imperfection, a life that can't be faked. The producers made the right call filming extensively on location in China, and the payoff is a film that feels authentic in its portrayal of the world where the story unfolds. Let's address a topic that's particularly relevant for younger audiences, the movie's message about bullying. The Karate Kid. 2010 wasn't the first film to tackle bullying, nor the most nuanced, but it was one of the most effective at reaching a wide audience with a clear, positive message. The movie portrays bullying not as a minor inconvenience or a rite of passage, but as something that causes real, deep suffering. Dre isn't a hero who shrugs off beatings and moves on like nothing happened. He's a kid who cries, who's terrified, who doesn't want to leave his apartment, who feels isolated and helpless. And that honest depiction of bullying's emotional toll matters because it validates the experience of kids going through similar things and tells them what you're feeling is real, it's valid, and you're not alone. But the movie goes beyond just depicting the problem. It also offers a solution, albeit a cinematic and somewhat idealized one. Dre's answer to bullying isn't violence or revenge, it's personal growth, discipline, and the support of a mentor. He doesn't learn kung fu to hunt down Cheng and beat him up. He learns it so he can defend himself if necessary, gain confidence in who he is, and prove through the tournament that he deserves respect. And the resolution, when Cheng bows to him at the end, suggests that the best way to overcome a bully isn't to return violence with violence, but to earn your bully's respect through your own merits. It's an idealistic message, sure. Real life is rarely that clean. But as an aspiration, as an ideal worth striving for, it's a powerful and positive. I also think it's worth examining how the film deals with masculinity, because there's a subtextual conversation about what it means to be a man that's interesting and progressive for its time. Early on, Dre has a pretty conventional notion of manhood. Be tough, don't back down, never show weakness. And that notion gets reinforced by the bullying. He feels like he should be able to defend himself and that his inability to do so somehow makes him less of a man. But Mr. Han teaches him a different kind of masculinity, one that includes vulnerability, patience, empathy, and self-control. Han isn't less of a man for weeping over his lost family. He's more of a person, because he has the courage to face his pain rather than flee from it. And Dre absorbs that lesson. He learns that real strength isn't in your fists, but in your character. That real courage isn't the absence of fear, but acting in spite of it. And that real manhood isn't proven through violence, but through honor, respect, and compassion. It's a message that, in today's era of conversations around toxic masculinity and positive male role models, feels more relevant than ever. Let's lighten things up for a second and talk about the movie's most memorable moments, the ones that stick with you long after the credits have rolled. For me, several stand out above the rest. The first, obviously, is the jacket revelation. That instant when Dre realizes the put-on take-off movements are defense techniques. It's a moment of pure cinematic satisfaction that works like a magic trick. You've been watching something for minutes without understanding its purpose, and suddenly everything clicks, and the surprise and joy you feel are completely genuine. It's the movie equivalent of a mystery novel's big reveal, where everything that seemed disconnected suddenly snaps together perfectly. Brilliant. The second memorable moment is Han's confession scene, which I've already dissected at length, but which deserves another mention as one of the most emotionally searing sequences in the entire film. Jackie Chan crying while he smashes his son's car is an image that burns itself into your memory, and the cocktail of rage, grief, and guilt he conveys is acting of the highest caliber. The third is Dre's final kick at the tournament, that crane stance meets cobra technique move that clinches the victory. It's a moment of pure euphoria, the kind that makes you want to leap off your couch and cheer, and it works because the whole movie has been building toward it. The cobra scene at the temple, the lessons about fluidity and adaptability, the leg injury that forces Dre to get creative, everything converges in that single moment, and the payoff is immense. The fourth is Chung's bow at the end, already mentioned, but so powerful it bears repeating. It's a moment that transforms the antagonist into a fully realized human being, closes Dre's arc perfectly, and delivers a message of hope and reconciliation that leaves you with a warm feeling in your chest. It's not the victory that matters most, it's the respect that comes with it. And the fifth, perhaps less dramatic, but equally memorable, is the shadow puppet show where Dre and Mei Ying sit side by side in silence watching the performance. It's a moment of visual beauty and emotional intimacy with no dialogue at all. Just the silhouettes of the puppets on the screen and the illuminated faces of two young people watching in wonder. It's cinema in its purest form. Images telling a story without a single word. So, if you were to ask me point blank whether I recommend this movie, the answer is a definite yes, with some caveats. I especially recommend it for families with kids and teens, because it's a film that entertains, moves, and inspires in equal measure, and carries a positive message about perseverance, respect, and personal growth that's genuinely valuable for a young audience. I also recommend it for martial arts fans because the fight scenes are well executed and show real respect for Kung Fu as both an art and a philosophy. And I'd recommend it to anyone who appreciates a strong mentor-student story because the Dre-Han relationship is one of the film's greatest assets and has emotional moments that can reach even the most cynical viewer. However, if you're a die-hard devotee of the 1984 original and can't fathom anyone laying a finger on that classic, this might not be for you. Or at least go in with an open mind and the willingness to judge it on its own merits rather than holding it up against the original at every turn. And if you don't like predictable movies where you can see every plot beat coming, you're not going to find many surprises here either. But for everyone else, for the vast majority of viewers who just want to have a good time with a well-made film, The Karate Kid 2010 is a more than solid pick. I'd like to wrap up this analysis with a thought about what this movie represents in the larger context of remakes and reinventions. We live in an era where Hollywood endlessly recycles, readapts, and reimagines its intellectual properties, and more often than not, the results are disappointing. Remakes that miss what made the original special, belated sequels that tarnish a franchise's legacy, reimaginings that have no reason to exist beyond the profit motive. In that context, The Karate Kid 2010 is an example of how to do a remake that actually works. It's not perfect, and it doesn't surpass the original in every respect, but it achieves something most remakes can't. It justifies its own existence. It does so by offering a different cultural perspective, a new geographic and social setting, powerful performances, especially from Jackie Chan, and an emotional core that beats with a pulse all its own. It's not the shadow of a better movie. It's its own movie with its own identity, and that deserves acknowledgement. At the end of the day, The Karate Kid 2010 is a film that reminds you why we love stories in the first place. Because they let us believe that a scared, bullied kid can become a champion, that a broken man can find redemption through generosity, that cultural and language barriers can be overcome with respect and goodwill, and that martial arts, far from being merely a way to fight, can be a path toward self-discovery and inner peace. These are simple ideas, maybe even naive ones, but in a world that often feels complicated and cruel, we need stories that remind us of these basic truths. And this movie, for all its imperfections and limitations, does that effectively and movingly. Let's dig a little deeper into the system of supporting characters orbiting the protagonists, because even though we've covered the main players, there are minor figures that add texture to the story. Harry, the friend Dre briefly makes upon arriving in Beijing, played by Luke Carberry, is a small but meaningful character. He's another Western kid living in China, and his narrative purpose is twofold. On one hand, he gives Dre a temporary ally who shows him that adapting to a new culture is possible. On the other, his gradual disappearance from the story, as Dre dives deeper into the world of Kung Fu, symbolizes Dre's transition from one world to another, from his American identity to his emerging identity as a student of Chinese martial arts. He's a bridge character, and while he doesn't get much development, he fulfills his story function efficiently. Then there's Chung's crew, those kids who back him up during the bullying and who compete in the tournament. Though they're not individually fleshed out, as a group they serve an important role. They represent Master Lee's influence and illustrate how toxic teaching can produce an entire cohort of aggressive, empathy-deficient young people. And what's interesting is that at the end, when Chung shows Dre respect, his friends follow suit, suggesting that Master Lee's influence was like a poison that, once removed, allows these kids' natural humanity to reemerge. It's a subtle but significant detail that reinforces the film's theme about the power of educational role models. I want to go deeper on a technical element.